25-hour call-in marathon continues now. We're highlighting key events from each year since our first regularly scheduled national call-in show began 25 years ago.
I just enjoy when the Senate or representatives, the House orders, or after.
Special orders is what you're thinking of.
Right, special orders. Sometimes they're special, sometimes they're not so special. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When you hear that B-1 noise flying overhead, what do you think to yourself when it rattles your windows a little bit? Because Rapid City is Ellsworth Air Force Base, right?
Thank God for that, too. But what
That's right. Just think to yourself the sound of freedom.
When the government is thinking, and I would call $2 trillion deficit thinking, these guys okay a 50% pay raise for themselves. And to me, this is just so outrageous. It is just so absolutely ridiculous.
You're right. As a matter of fact, it would be an example for the rest of the country for these top officials, starting with President George Bush, to say times are tough. We've created this huge debt, this huge deficit, program cutbacks around the slate. We're going to take a pay cut. Just imagine the respect and support they would get from the people.
The homeless issue and the hungry issue is a very vital security to our nation. And I think when it comes time to helping the hungry around the nation, and when we think about the effort that both even President Reagan and Gorbachev have planned, needless to say, on some of their meetings, even though they have talked about disarmament, but they've also talked about helping the hungry.
We're finding a new phenomenon. We're finding the working homeless. In other words, somebody with a job unable to afford a home. And not as part of us, not just part of our country. It's not part of the American dream. It's not part of anything.
Our black youth are dying at a proportional rate that is tantamount to Vietnam. You have not mentioned it at all. No one has mentioned it. Our young black men are dying at a rate of 1 out of 22. I mean, no one is even talking about it. That concerns me very, very, very much, seeing that I am a black man.
I know that crime is the leading cause of death among African-American males between 18 and 24, not heart disease, not cancer. So what we've been discussing here is how are we going to deal with the issue of drugs? How do we bring that to the forefront?
People in this country don't understand when the House gives something to the president, he does not have to go by what the House wants. He can cut, and he can cut the money. They are blaming the Democrats for all the cutting, and that is the problem.
It seems to me that in the fiscal squeeze we're in now, that inevitably we're going to have squeezes on some parts of the budget if we're going to get our fiscal house in order, which I think has to be a top priority.
That's John Kane, floor director, who's doing all the shaking around to cue us to get started here in hour 10 of our 90-hour call-in, 25-hour call-in marathon. The topic, 1989 and the U.S. role in the world. The guest, Christopher Hitchens, Vanity Fair columnist, among other things. It was 1989 that the Berlin Wall came down, December 1989. Christopher Hitchens. November, pardon me. Great time for the West, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Well, no, it was a great time for the East, actually. I mean, because that moment in Berlin was created by a movement of people from Hungary through Romania, all hoping that they could escape the grip of the Warsaw Pact Comecon regimes and begin to travel, open themselves to the West a bit. And at a certain point, the East German government said, well, I remember the announcement very well, because they said we may have to open the borders. And I remember thinking, open their borders, does that mean the wall is coming down? Didn't hit me right away. But a few hours later, people were dancing on top of it. But a few hours after that, they were taking hammers to it. I still have a chunk of the wall on my mantelpiece at home.
But politically, wasn't it a great time for the West? Was it we looked great in the world's eyes at that point? And do we still have that same feeling today?
Well, for a lot of people in the West, it was a feeling of vindication. That it had been worthwhile fighting the Cold War. That all the sacrifices and all the nuclear expenditures and all of that had all been worth it. And that argument actually still goes on. Many people say, well, if it wasn't for the Star Wars initiative, that would never have happened. I've actually never found that a persuasive argument myself. I think that a huge credit still has to go to Mikhail Gorbachev.
Really?
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, he openly told the governments of East Germany and Hungary and Poland and Czechoslovakia, we're not coming to your aid. If you can't keep the support of your people, or keep it, if you don't have it, we can't make up the difference. And he took the risk, he and his then foreign minister, Mr. Shevardnadze, of letting it run. Still hated by the old-line Stalinists for this reason, and I don't think credited enough by the people who say that the Berlin Wall fell down because Ronald Reagan made a fighting speech. Not to take the credit away from that speech, but I think that the dissidents of Eastern Europe and the moral fiber of Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev have a lot to do with it. Thought so at the time, think so still.
What was your opinion of Ronald Reagan in 1989?
Very low, I have to say.
Has it changed?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, he is a figure in history in a different way from the one I would have awarded him. Who am I to be awarding these things? But then, I mean, I couldn't forget that he had said things like, don't start me, but, you know, the South African government has stood beside us in every war we've ever fought. That was his comment on apartheid, when in fact the South African ruling party, the National Party, had been on the other side in the Second World War. That, if you remember, intercontinental ballistic missiles once launched could be recalled. Remember that? That the Russian language had no word for freedom. He said that. The word is svoboda, by the way. I don't speak Russian very well. He often gave me the impression of neither knowing nor caring anything about the subject at all, and being a very dangerous guy. He also used to like to ruminate in public about the end of days and the end times prophecies of the Bible with other wingnuts, which I thought was exactly what you don't want during a potential nuclear standoff. But he did actually have one thing right, which I actually always had in common with him, that the belief that it couldn't last, the Soviet system couldn't last. It was doomed. It was over. No one believed in it anymore. It was a matter of time. And on that point, okay.
Has the role of the U.S. in world affairs changed from 1989 to 2005?
Self-evidently, yes. I mean, in how many ways would you like us to do it? You want to narrow the question a bit?
You take it wherever you want.
I'll give you one example, actually, because 89 was a big year for me, apart from the fact that it was the year I became 40. On Valentine's Day, 89, the Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa. First time we heard the word fatwa, I think, or most people did, saying that he would offer money in his own name for the suborning of murder of a novelist living in England, who happens to be a friend of mine, was a friend of mine then, Salman Rushdie. And I thought that was an unprecedented challenge, not just to what we might call First Amendment values, but, you know, to civilization, really. And what impressed me then, and depressed me too, was how many people said, no, the problem is not the Ayatollah, the problem is Rushdie. Rushdie asked for this. He brought it on himself by writing a novel critical of Islamic tradition, or of the literal interpretation of the Quran. And among the people who said this was then President Bush, who wasn't interested particularly in this. He said no American interest is involved in this question. Mr. Rushdie is a leftist author. We don't care about him. Marlin Fitzwater, I remember, said, Marlin or Marvin Fitzwater? Marlin Fitzwater said the same thing. I remember thinking, well, this is extraordinary. There's a frontal challenge coming at us from Islamic extremism, and the Republican government doesn't seem to give a damn, and in fact Mr. Bush is fairly fresh from his Iran-Contra racketeering negotiations and may still have a sneaking sympathy for the people he was doing business with in hostage trading and arms trading and undermining the Constitution and in order to punish Nicaragua. So I'm not claiming the mantle of prophecy here or prescience, but I do remember distinctly thinking that this is new and we'll be hearing more about it, and there is coming a confrontation with fundamentalist Islam, and I don't think I was wrong about that.
Our guest is Christopher Hitchens, who has sat at this table 38 times since November 7th, 1983, almost as much as Carl Lubsdorff and Susan Page, who are the two of the top winners, 44 times and 40 times for them. We're talking about the year 1989 and the role of the U.S. in the world in a more general sense. You can see, once again, it's 5 in the morning here on the East Coast. And look at those phone lines. Every single one of them lit up, so let's get right to them. A 10-year watcher from Springfield, Illinois. You're on with Christopher Hitchens.
Good morning, Christopher.
Morning.
As you know, yesterday, October the 7th, was C-SPAN's 25th call-in anniversary, but it was also the 4th anniversary of the Afghanistan War.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I guess you must be right about that.
Yeah, another point I wanted to make, it was also the feast day of Our Lady of Victory in the Battle of Lepanto, which was on October the 7th, 1571.
So where are we going, caller?
Pardon me?
Where are we going with this?
Well, I just wanted to connect that to 9/11 because Sobieski, the King of Poland, defeated the Turks at Vienna on September the 12th, 1683. And 9/11 was the eve of that battle, so I just thought there might be a connection between the Battle of Lepanto and the Battle of Vienna.
Well, I'm not usually one to enthuse about Our Lady of any kind, whether it's Lourdes or Calcutta, but I think I'm the first person to have pointed out in print that the defeat of the Ottoman Empire at the gates of Vienna did take place, depending on which calendar, not which calendar you use, which time zone you imagine yourself to be in, on, I think, actually, September the 10th, 11th of 1683. And I pointed that out not long after 9/11. I can't believe that that date isn't significant for the al-Qaeda forces, because after all, it is the mission of bin Laden, or so he says, at any rate, so he boasts, to restore the lost caliphate based in Istanbul, Constantinople. So I think that's quite likely to be relevant in their minds, though they've never made a point of it in any communique. As for Lepanto, I think that may be coincidence. It's certainly coincidence as far as the war in Afghanistan goes. But though I'm not by any means a believing Catholic, I do think that one of the finest battle poems ever written, it was by G.K. Chesterton, about Lepanto, and I can even quote the opening staves if anyone challenges me on that. White clouds falling in the courts of the sun, and the Soldan of Byzantium is smiling as they run, and it goes on to build up this fantastic naval battle where the forces of Christendom vanquish the Turks. Magnificent tour de force by Chesterton.
When it comes to the U.S. role in the world, where does the Iraqi war fit into that?
Iraq happens to be the front line of the battle between civilization and barbarism, if you want me to be as simplistic as I can be. It's the country chosen by the forces of jihad some time ago as their next frontline state. They were planning this before they were evicted from Afghanistan. They knew what anyone could see, which is that Iraq was moving from being a rogue state to a failed state. Actually, it was already both things. It was imploding. Mr. Zarqawi and other nightmarish characters already making their way there. The regime itself had become a jihadist regime, was pumping out propaganda, not for secularism, as some idiots will tell you, but entirely for holy war. The Fedayeen Saddam was becoming one of the strongest paramilitary forces in the state. There are people who say, they even said yesterday after the president's speech, this wouldn't be true if we hadn't invaded it. Actually, the contrary is true. That's the way it was going. We should have been taking care of Iraq a lot sooner than we did. And the line's now been drawn in a way that I don't think can be altered. We are not going to, I hope, even consider surrendering a country and a society of that importance to which and to whose members we've made so many promises in the past, with whom we've incurred so many responsibilities. We're not going to say we walk away from this and abandon them to the tender mercies of jihadism. It's out of the question to do that.
Next call for Christopher Hitchens comes from Chicago, a 10-year watcher. Good morning.
Hello?
Go ahead, Chicago.
Yes.
I can hear that.
Hello?
Yes,
You're on the air. Go ahead.
Well, Christopher, I've also been reading you for 10 years in The Nation, and very much enjoyed your column there, and I know people have asked you over and over again, what happened, what the change brought about, and maybe you could address that more generally. But I wanted to ask you, well, since this is about 1989, in 1989, as you know, the U.S. was still actively sponsoring militant Islam, i.e. the Mujahideen, and I notice these days you're focusing on the problem of Islamic fundamentalism, and rightly so. Obviously, though, the rise of Islamic fundamentalism or militant Islam didn't happen in a vacuum. Didn't U.S. imperialism kind of put that on steroids? And secondly, why aren't you focusing as much on the global phenomenon of religious fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism that's happening in the United States? It's quite nasty, I feel.
Thank you, caller. Mr.
Well, if we just keep it to 89, as in point of fact, you're mistaken, because the Red Army was out of Afghanistan by then, though you are right in saying that the United States and China and Egypt and many other countries helped the Afghan resistance to the Red Army occupation, but I don't see that there was any choice but to do that. And if you ask yourself what the roots of Islamic fundamentalism are, why are people, some of whom took part in that struggle, why do they decide that their main enemy is the country that actually helped them against the Soviet Union? There must be something irrational here, or something about their own position that they haven't declared. And I think you would, if you inquired, find out very easily what it was. Mr. bin Laden has always said that though the struggle to evict communism from Afghanistan was a tough struggle, long, hard one in which many of his comrades died, there would come a later struggle with the United States, the American empire, which he thought would be easy because the United States would be a pushover, didn't have the ability or willingness to fight, was run by Jews and women and homosexuals, and was corrupt and hedonistic. A lot depends on proving him wrong, I would say. In the struggle to do that, I think obviously one needs a critique of religion, yes. And since you were kind enough to say you've been reading my stuff, I'm sorry if you've missed what I've written about Jewish fundamentalism, for example, in the West Bank and Gaza, the millennial settlers. I had a long engagement with them and with their supporters, saying that their attempt to bring on the Messiah in this way is wicked and deserves to be defeated, and not one American dollar should go to subsidizing it. And I've also attacked various other religious crackpots and fanatics like Mother Teresa, so-called the alleged saint of Calcutta, fraud and demagogue and fanatic. And of course, if you want to move it even nearer home, I mean, I think that the people who say they believe in what they call intelligent design have scored exactly only one victory, and it's the only one they'll ever get, which is to get us all to call it intelligent, which it's not. By the way, I think we should stop referring to it as that. I think we should call it ID or something of the sort and put it always in inverted commas. But it's like Saudi Arabia. Once you call it after its royal family, the royal family are praised by everyone who mentions the name. We should stop doing that, and we should stop saying intelligent design for what is scientific and moral and political fraud.
When did you leave the
I spend most of my life fighting against religion in all its forms.
Sorry about that. When did you leave the nation?
I resigned from the nation not long after the 11th of September 2001, and a little bit before the intervention in Iraq, because I was fed up with the masochistic tone that the magazine took about the confrontation with jihadism and its totalitarian allies. It was basically saying, well, this must have something to do with American foreign policy. It must be a revenge for something we did wrong. I thought, no, I'm not listening to a bar of that song. Don't you tell me that a movement that wants to stone Amina Lawal, the Nigerian woman who was provably adulterous because she was holding a baby in her arms without a husband, is doing that because they want to help the Palestinians. Don't make me laugh. Don't take me for a fool. I know that's not true. Do you think they enslave Afghanistan in order to emancipate the Gaza Strip? Do you think they blow up Shia mosques in Iraq because they care about oppressed people? They're murdering their co-religionists or versions of the co-religionists every day. If you want to think what they might want to do for us or to us, just see what they do to other Muslims. And I couldn't get this simple point across to most of my colleagues at the Nation, so I quit and felt instantly much better.
Do you ever feel any pressure from Vanity Fair when you write about Iraq?
No, I can safely say I don't. I mean, the editor takes a very forward position of his own. But to his credit, he decides to do that in his own column, his editorial letter in the magazine. He doesn't inflict it on others who write for it. He awards himself the space in which he could easily discuss other things. He and I have debated it a couple of times on television. No, there would be no hint of that. By the way, I shouldn't even imply that there was any such hint at the Nation either. They never tried to change anything I wrote, but there came a point when I thought that not just the editor, as in Graydon Carter's case, but the magazine itself had become a sort of echo chamber, as I put it, for people who thought that John Ashcroft was more dangerous than Osama bin Laden. And as I say, I'm totally sick of that mentality, that masochism, that falsification of the reality. You can see it disproved every day. These people are murdering Muslims in Indonesia, in Iraq, in Nigeria. They're not the product of poverty and unemployment. They are the cause of poverty and misery and unemployment. We have to get this right, or we will get everything else wrong, and we'll be committing cultural and political suicide. And I'm not willing to stand by and see that happen.
A 25-year viewer from Los Angeles, thanks for holding, and you're on the air with Christopher Hitchens.
Thanks, Mr. Hitchens. Thank you for getting to the truth of the letter that I'd sent on Cindy Sheen's behalf to ABC's Nightline. I don't agree with your position on the war, but I very much appreciate you getting out the truth in the sidebar of your piece for Slate.com on August 18th, I believe. Anyway, you and I have been in touch via email.
Yes, your Justice Quest, aren't you?
Yeah, and you know that I disagree with your position.
I do know that, yeah.
Saying about religion, there are a lot of issues you and I agree on very much. Bottom line is, Mr. Hitchens, you know that we were attacked back in 1993 at the World Trade Center, and tragically on 9/11 because of U.S. support for Israel. Robert Pappy's.
You know what? I'm going to leave him because he called in. He got in between 8 and 9 this evening. He's a repeat caller. He breaks the rules. He breaks the 30-day rule. He gets in.
Dear.
And no matter, we could be talking about economic policy, it'd be about Israel.
It would be the same, I know
so
that.
Do you hear from him
He's a very
often,
assiduous emailer to me, and he's actually, of the ones I get, he's one of the brighter ones. And he did, having promoted Miss Sheehan, who's, I'm sure, known to all your audience, he did point out to me that she had said, agreeing with him in point of fact, that her son had been killed by George Bush, not by the people who actually killed him, and had been killed in a Jewish war for Israel. And when I challenged Ms. Sheehan and said, well, is that what you're using the memory of your son to promote? She denied ever having said it, which she had, and blamed this gentleman for inserting it into her email. In other words, the next thing you're going to hear from Ms. Sheehan is she has messages from outer space in the fillings of her teeth. She's a flake and a moral coward because she wouldn't stand by what she had actually said. And he was brave enough to point this out to his co-thinkers, so I'm grateful to him for that. But anyone who believes that we were attacked on 9/11 because of American support for Israel is fooling themselves and attempting to fool others. I repeat the question: what is the connection between the murder of 17 Indonesians last week in Bali, or the stoning of a Nigerian woman who's committed adultery, or the banning of polio vaccine by the imams of northern Nigeria because they think it's a UN-US plot? Or any of these things, and the emancipation of the Palestinians from occupation. There's no connection at all. Mr. bin Laden does not believe in a Palestinian state. That's why he has almost no Palestinian supporters. He believes that Palestine should eventually become part of a greater caliphate that would be run by people like him. He's not anti-imperialist. He's for the restoration of a lost and barbarous empire. And I have to suspect, not in the case of this caller, I must say, but in the case of people who can't stay off Israel, that there's something suspect about their obsession with the Jewish question. I put it no higher.
What is the flag on your lapel?
It's the flag of Kurdistan.
If you could sit back, I think the camera's going to go in and take a peek at it.
This is the flag of the Kurdish people whose emancipation, especially in the 3 northern provinces of Iraq, has been the most spectacular success of the regime change policy. For those who don't know about this at all, if I can say a word on their behalf, the Kurds are the largest stateless minority in the Middle East. In fact, they're the largest stateless people in the world. There's no firm estimate of their population. It's probably between 26 and 30 million, living in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, roughly where that border converges. Uncomfortable place to live geopolitically, but they've been there for a very long time and have been dispossessed and, as you know, not long ago subjected to an attempted genocide by Saddam Hussein involving the use of weapons of mass destruction, and are beginning to find their feet as a minority and to express themselves and achieve a version of self-government, which I think is a very worthwhile cause and one that should be better known and should have more support in the West. So I'm very proud to wear their flag and be their friend.
In 1989, the year that the Berlin Wall came down, the population of the world was about 5.2 billion. U.S. population 247 million, currently about 300 million. Median income up to almost 29,000. Unemployment rate 5.3. U.S. debt 2.9 trillion. Federal budget 1.1 trillion. We're well over 2.2 trillion today. The deficit at that point was 153 billion. Economic growth 3.5%. C-SPAN was available in about about 48.6 million homes. Today, it's available in about 90 million homes. Next call for Christopher Hitchens, Seattle, Washington. 20 years of watching C-SPAN. Good morning.
Hello.
Go ahead, Seattle.
I'm really wondering how this whole religious fight that got, you know, with weapons of mass destruction, and I mean, it was Saudi Arabians that were all the bombers, and for somehow along the line, we're ending up to turn this as some kind of a religious fight. We're going to show them a better way to live. And I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all.
All right, thank you, caller.
Doesn't sound as if he does, I have to say. I think I'd rather take that as a comment. I was trying to think while you were talking, was I making 29,000 in 1989?
Were you?
I'm not sure I was.
Flushing, New York.
Was that really media?
Well, speaking of which, what's your U.S. citizenship status?
Well, I applied to become a citizen after 2001 as a gesture, really, I suppose. I mean, I have a platinum green card. In other words, it's one of those ones that doesn't run out, and I have 3 American children and pay American taxes on that money and all this. But I thought, no, I was cheating on my dues if I didn't apply for citizenship. But the paperwork has gone into the labyrinth of Homeland Security, and I don't know where I'll ever hear from it again.
And you applied after 2001,
yeah,
and you still.
Probably I should have.
It's still out there in the.
Oh man, I mean, what it's like for people who are trying for the first time, who aren't English, haven't been here for a long time, and so forth. I can't imagine, but because I have, you know, a certain number of advantages, and I can't get them to reply, except they keep promising, you know, you'll hear in 90 days, and that was, you know, many 90-day periods ago.
And
they cashed the check there.
Did you have to hire a lawyer?
Look, if they don't want me, I don't insist. But I felt that I ought to make the right move. I ought to do the right thing.
Have you hired a lawyer to help you, or
yeah.
are you doing it? Does it make it easier to hire the lawyer? More expensive.
I actually have a lawyer who, because of my book on Mother Teresa, said she'd do it for free, as a matter of fact. But so I didn't hire her. And she's very good at what she does. But no, the backlog is so terrible, and the bureaucracy, as anyone who's had any Homeland Security dealings knows, is insane. And not in this case, but in most other cases, probably lethally stupid and bureaucratic.
Christopher Hitchens' book on Mother Teresa is called The Missionary Position. His most recent book is Thomas Jefferson, Author of America. That came out in May?
Yes.
Next call for him is Flushing, New York. 10-year
Hi.
watcher. Hi.
Hi, congratulations, C-SPAN.
Thanks.
And
Thanks
I
for
just
watching.
wanted to. Hello, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay. You were talking before, Mr. Hitchens. You were talking before about, Ronald Reagan and the fall of the Berlin Wall. I was to understand that we in this country were in very bad shape in the 80s. I mean, I can remember it was after the Vietnam War. We had Watergate. We had everything. Everything was going bad. The Soviet Union was looks like a powerhouse. I think the only one that believed that it wasn't, or a few people believed that it wasn't, was Ronald Reagan. And I think he refused to deal with the Russians. He refused to deal with them until they lifted some of, treated the people, gave the people more freedom. I think once that happened, the people became, the people, once they got their freedom, they didn't want to go back to a dictatorship. And I think George Bush, the father, I think he's the one that wanted to. He didn't believe that we could. He was better off with the situation the way it was. He didn't know about a new democracy. But what I'm saying is the son now goes over to Iraq, and I think it was a gutsy move, and I think we needed to bring democracy over there. Somehow we had to start it, simply because democratic nations don't fight with one another, and it's a way to deal with the terrorists. I don't know any other way. But the people in this country are screaming against it, and I just don't understand. Nobody has another plan, another thought on the subject. And I did read a book with Nathan, I think it's Shransky's,
Yes.
A Case for Democracy, and
Yes.
it made so much sense what he said, that people, once they are liberated, they don't want to go back. It's like asking the blacks if they want to go back to slavery.
Caller, thank you for your comments. Can I ask, why are you calling a call-in show at 5:30 in the morning? You just getting up? Or have you been watching all night?
I woke up, yeah, I woke up. And
Do you turn on C-SPAN first thing in the morning?
I do indeed. That's the first, and I watch it every morning, and I think it just proves the case for democracy. This is a place where every one of us can call in, voice our opinion, and not be carried off to jail.
Thank you for calling, and thank you for watching. Christopher Hitchens.
Well, to take your points in order, I think you're right that Ronald Reagan was unusual, even in the Republican world, in his view about the final demise of communism. And I'll give you two instances that would make your case in a way. George Bush, who you contrasted with him, had been head of the CIA for quite a long time, just prior to this, and the Central Intelligence Agency continued to report that the Soviet economy was booming, that the Soviet armed forces were going great guns, that the whole Russian system was in tremendous shape. And of course, as we've found out, that was, and some of us suspected or knew or could at least argue, that was false. It was a system that was completely corroded from within, especially in its Eastern European dependencies, and it just took one shove to bring it down. You have to remember, though, something we haven't touched upon, which is in early '89, in my memory, so February, March, April, I should have this more closely memorized, but the rising in Beijing of the students of the university there in Tiananmen Square, and the unforgettable images of the democratic statue they put up and the stand they made before the tanks came. Now, if you notice, a lot of Republicans, and you'd have to include even Ronald Reagan in this, were quite quiet about that, because China, after all, was an American ally at the time, and in some ways still is, against the Soviet Union. In fact, Henry Kissinger came right out and said that if he'd been the government of China, he'd have done the same thing in that square. And he said, you can't expect them to put up with protest of this kind. So realpolitik doesn't completely give way to idealism in this respect. And after all, for the same reason, Mr. Reagan and his government had insisted on recognizing the Khmer Rouge as the government of Cambodia and seat them as the representatives of Cambodia at the United Nations, when they were not. Quite apart from the fact that they shouldn't have been, they actually were not the legal government of Cambodia. And I stress this because I don't think we've reached a point where we can say we've left realpolitik behind. We still have to make, a lot of the time, or it is still believed by some that we do have to make compromises with dictatorial and aggressive regimes as lesser evils. And you notice if you put the word lesser in front of evil, people don't complain. They laugh when the president says axis of evil. They say evil, how simplistic can you get? But if you put lesser in front of it, all liberals think evil is a perfectly okay word. We have not finished hashing this out, I think. But the process was well begun in 1989 because it was a year really of human liberation on a very, very large and memorable scale. And that's why I loved every minute of that year, even though some of it went so badly.
We're in hour 10 of our 25-hour marathon. This will go through 9 p.m. on Saturday night. We appreciate you all watching. Cincinnati, you're on the air. Go ahead.
First-time caller.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I was wondering if Mr. Hitchens could comment on what he considers the morality of H.W. Bush. I think that he started some policies continued by President Reagan, and my viewpoint is that George H.W. Bush will go down in history as one of the most corrupt presidents we've ever had.
Why is that, caller?
I think I know he started some policies in the DOD that have been carried through until today, and that it was he personally that promoted some of these policies, and that now the DOD is stuck with.
Can you give us an example of one of those?
Not right now. No, I cannot. I'm sorry.
Okay. And can I ask you, are you just getting up and watching, or you been watching all night, or?
I was awakened at 4 a.m. so that I could possibly get on C-SPAN and...
to talk to Mr. Hitchens?
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that thought. Look, at the time I remember why I couldn't stand the sight of George Herbert Walker Bush. It was because of the way he'd lied about his role in the Iran-Contra matter, which I thought then and think now was one of the most horrible, deliberated sabotages of constitutional rule in this country that there ever was. I mean, just to remind you, it involved people working in the basement of the White House for a president for whom they could claim deniability, but who was their president as well as the legitimate president, to raise a private budget, which the Constitution quite flat out forbids, without the knowledge of Congress, to trade in hostages with the Ayatollahs in Iran, and to use the profit of that to finance a bunch of goons in Nicaragua. You could not have a more flagrant violation of the Constitution, and the president of the day, Mr. Reagan, was very lucky to escape impeachment, in my view. Some of his aides had to go to jail, and many others had to be convicted of lying to Congress, and the vice president flat out lied about his part in it. And I never forgave him for it, and I still can't look at his face without remembering that. I'd have to say that he did take the decision, though he was partly responsible for the original mistake that allowed it to occur, and criminal policy that allowed it to occur, he did take the decision that the regime of Saddam Hussein could not be allowed to take over the state of Kuwait. Remember, people lazily say Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. He did nothing of the kind. He annexed Kuwait and made it part of Iraq. He abolished a member state of the United Nations and of the Arab League. And if he'd been able to get away with it, would have had the resources with which to complete his nuclear program. And in retrospect, I support President Bush on that much more than I did at the time. So it's very rare that you have someone who's completely useless as a president. I don't think I think Bill Clinton would probably be the only one who might as well never have been born.
1989 was the same year U.S. went into Panama, wasn't it?
It was, very late 89, as a partial trade-off. I remember it very well because it was just before Christmas. And just as the last of the communist dictatorships in Eastern Europe, the one that wasn't dependent so much on Moscow, Romania, Ceausescu's personal fiefdom. I was there for the death and overthrow of Mr. Ceausescu. And to my amazement, just before this happened, James Baker made a speech, then Secretary of State, saying to Moscow, to President Gorbachev, we don't mind if Russia intervenes in Romania now, because it's such a horrific dictatorship in its time it went. You know, if you feel you have to, you have American permission. I've lived to see an American Secretary of State saying we don't care if the Red Army intervenes in in a European country. But quite clearly what that was a sort of trade-off for the fact that the United States had had enough of Mr. Noriega in Panama, for one reason or another, not all of them creditable, and was going to go in and sort that out unilaterally. And in the extraordinary kaleidoscope of events, that Christmas, Boxing Day, New Year, all of that got overlooked. But boy, it was fascinating to live through.
What was it like to be in Romania when the Ceausescu's? Didn't they end up getting hung upside down, kind of like Mussolini? Am I right about that?
No, but they were. I mean, it was nearly that bad. They were shot. there's a video of them being executed. They were kept inside. They were captured. They were kept inside a tank for a while as a jail cell, and they were dragged out and given a very brief hearing in front of a sort of drumhead tribunal, and then put up against the wall and machine gunned, which meant that there was never a trial and never a full inquest into how they'd run Romania, and we could never be sure who exactly it was who was behind this coup. A lot of people thought, well, if anyone had it coming, he and his ghastly wife, Elena, did, but I've sort of thought that myself a bit, and he killed an awful lot of people in the rebellion against him, and his black uniformed secret police were renowned for their lethality, but there was something sordid and creepy about it. In fact, because the rebellion began in Transylvania, the sort of Hungarian-oriented bit of Romania, everyone compared it to a sort of vampire trial and a driving of a stake through the heart so that the dictator could never come back. It had that surreal character to it. And the place was freezing and starving and terrified, and you saw people who'd never known a minute of life without permanently having to see Ceausescu on the screen or hearing his 10-hour speeches. You know, they couldn't believe that this monster had actually died. It took them a long time to accept it. A bit like the Iraqis when they heard about the deaths of Mudai and Qusay Hussein. Even when they saw the bodies, they didn't believe it. They thought this is fake.
We have about 10 minutes left with our guest. Over the years, we've had well over 12,000 individual guests on the C-SPAN call-in programs. And as we take this next call, we're going to look at some of those politicians who have been on the air with us. Morenci, Michigan, thanks for holding. You're on with Christopher Hitchens. Go ahead.
Hi, Christopher. How are you?
A bit early to say.
I really enjoy listening to you and watching whenever I see you on, which is why I'm up this morning. But
thank you.
I was wondering what your thoughts are regarding Bush's invasion of Iraq and why he hasn't framed his argument around the weapons of mass destruction in the sense that even if his intelligence had said that there may not be weapons of mass destruction, we don't know. At the point of, it seems to me by the end of 2002, having defied the UN and hence the world for, I guess, 17 different resolutions, letting the inspectors in, kicking them out, letting them in, kicking them out, I think 4 or 5 times.
Yes.
It seems to me that if he had said, look, I'm not sure if they're weapons of mass destruction, but at this point, and I believe Saddam Hussein should have led those inspectors by the hand and said, this is where they were, because we knew he had them after the Gulf War. He used them on the Kurds, killed thousands of people. He should have taken those inspectors by the hand and said, this is where they were, this is what we did to get rid of them, this is the documentation to prove it, and anything short of that, in my opinion, regardless of whether we had proof that they were there, at the time, we knew they were there at one point. I think if Bush had framed his argument in that respect, I think he would have had a lot less heat, a lot less criticism from people saying that he framed, or his basis for attacking was that, and then they weren't found. And
Okay, I understand perfectly what you're saying, and actually what you're saying is commonsensical. If you're the leader of a democratic country that's just undergone a terrorist attack and is expecting the possibility of a worse one, and you're confronted with a dictator who has praised this attack and given shelter to some of the people past and present who are interested in that kind of thing, which we know that Saddam was doing and can be proved to anyone, and are you going to face your voters and say, well, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's grant Saddam Hussein the presumption of innocence. This is also, as you say, the only regional government that has actually used weapons of mass destruction, not just within its own borders, but against Iran as well. It has a proven record of concealment, a special ministry to conceal weapons and to deceive inspectors, who, by the way, are not investigators. They're supposed to be just monitors. I think that the only thing you could possibly say is there's no more presumption of innocence here. There's no more benefit of the doubt. We're going to say as if, and nothing else would be sane or defensible. But in fact, that is in effect what the President and his advisors said, and Tony Blair too. And we still haven't found the weapons that Iraq declared that it had before the war. So the question is not, ha, 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 we didn't find them, but where are the weapons Iraq claimed to have had? But you're wrong in thinking that would have made any difference to the president's critics. These are people who would have been against a war with Iraq under any circumstances at all. And you can see the people who run this movement now and the sort of propaganda they come up with. They're the same people who said we shouldn't invade Afghanistan because it would be another Vietnam. And there was no question there of the Al-Qaeda connection, was there? But they still said leave it alone. This mentality is incurable. And though I've been a strong critic of the way the president has handled his public relations in this and his argument, I do not believe that any argument at all will win over the people who are either openly or secretly sympathetic to the other side in this war. People like George Galloway, people like Cindy Sheehan, who basically openly have said that they regard the jihadists in Iraq and Afghanistan as a resistance, as an insurgent popular movement, and who believe that, and say openly, as does Michael Moore and others, that Bush is the terrorist problem, not bin Laden. Well, people like that are not going to be convinced by evidence.
It was 22 years ago that Christopher Hitchens first appeared on our call-in programs. There's what he looked like. Hammond, Indiana.
Hello.
What was that?
Hello?
Go ahead, Hammond. You're on the air.
Wow.
Yes, Chris, I was wondering, this so-called, this Taliban mentality over there. Now, it's very easy for us to look at them as being wackos and fanatics, but don't you think that on their side, they're doing the same thing about our, say, fundamentalist Christians when they hear somebody like Franklin Graham saying that New Orleans is, being a punishment from God and stuff. Don't you think that they're using the same kind of propaganda on us as well, from their point of view? And we can't change how do you change a person's ideology,
Well, I mean, it does amaze me that people like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, who said that the World Trade Center was a punishment for, I forget now what, abortion or sodomy or something of the sort, are still in business in any way that anyone quotes them or pays them any attention or sends them any of their hard-earned savings. But their position and their mentality has always struck me as ludicrous and hateful and ignorant and superstitious. And having made myself plain on that, I still don't believe that they are the same as those who, for example, put bombs in mosques in Iraq in order to create a strategy of misery. No, they're not the same as that. But the religious mentality, the idea that faith is superior to reason, and that you can interpret God's will, and you can claim as a human mammal to know what it is, and tell other people what to do on that basis, and claim that you're not just created but supervised, and that you understand the cosmos. I mean, the unbelievable arrogance of that is, of course, always dangerous and can always lead to violence. But I would still say steady on. It's not a matter of propaganda. It's a matter of action, of deed, if you like.
Last call.
Still haven't got over that picture of myself.
Last call for Christopher Hitchens, Sacramento. You've been watching for 3 years, right?
Yes. Hi. I'm a big fan of Christopher. I've read a lot of his analysis. I have two questions in regards to Iraq. The first question is, what do you think that if the Democratic candidate John Kerry had won in 2004, what his response would have been to Iraq and what he might have done, aside from what, obviously the political posturing that's taken place, kind of extreme, what he actually would have done, what have actually been the real possible consequences. And my second question is, what do you think the actual consequences now of just pulling out, or not even just pulling out, what do you think not committing ourselves in the long run to backing the Iraqis up, what the actual long-term effect of that would be for the U.S. and the world in general? Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, very quickly, because I think we're getting the signs of wind up. In a small way, I half wish that John Kerry would be elected, because he had promised several times. He said, The president doesn't have a victory strategy for Iraq, but I do. I know how to win this war, and I'll show you how. But I would have liked to see him try, and I've also liked to see his party committed to his election on that basis, because now they don't talk about victory strategy anymore, and they may never have been. What they mean really to talk about is exit strategy. In other words, how to find a way to capitulate. And I think that's disgraceful and unprincipled. And I don't think I have to draw you a picture of what Iraq would look like if the coalition withdrew before we've guaranteed to our friends and allies there, who are the majority of the population, currently going through a very arduous and very interesting process of trying to evolve a constitutional form of federalism. After 35 years of divide and rule and fascism and war and the incitement of sectarian and confessional disagreements, it's a miraculous thing to see. We have no right to abandon them, it seems to me, either in their interests or in ours. But if you want to see what it would look like if a capitulation was brought about, you only have to look at Mr. Zarqawi's manifestos or look up some of the videos that he's so helpfully produced for you about how he treats those who he's captured and butchers them live on camera, or how he's gone to all the trouble of calling his organization Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia. I mean, he's pedantically laid it out for you, what he wants. I would have thought that should decide it for people, but I know that I'm in a minority in thinking this, but I don't care.
Our guest for the last hour has been Christopher Hitchens, Vanity Fair. Thank you so much for getting up at dark whatever and
no,
spending
I didn't get
an
up.
hour
I just
with
stayed
us.
up. But thank you for having me.
We're taking bets on that.
It's no worse than coming in at 7 or 8, I promise you. Very nice of you to ask me.
And it's almost 6 a.m. out here in the east for the next 3 hours. Rob Harleston is going to be out here at the table as the host. We've got some great segments coming up, and you'll hear about those in just a minute. For the last 4 hours, the overnight shift has included Greg Sizowitz as our director. Andrew Nason has been the producer. Danny Boone has been on camera. Chuck George has been doing the audio board. John Kane has been the floor director in here in the studio with us. And Rick Stoddard has been answering the phones if you had a chance to get in. The new crew is now taking over. Christy Slafka is sitting in the producer's chair, and Jen Imdorf has moved into the phone answer position. Enjoy the rest of our marathon, which goes through 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday.
It's time once again for you to meet one of the 25 C-SPAN viewers who have entered and won in C-SPAN's 25th anniversary of the Call-In Essay Contest. On the telephone with us from Lihue, Hawaii is Christina Carlson. She watches C-SPAN on Oceana Cable. Hello, Ms. Carlson.
Hello, Susan.
Well, tell me about Lihue. It sounds lovely.
Oh, it is beautiful. It's a small. It's the capital of Kauai. It's not very large, and well, it's just beautiful.
How long have you lived there?
I've lived on Lihue I've lived here for about 7 years now, and in Hawaii for about 20 years.
And when you were on the mainland, where was home?
Seattle, Washington.
And what took you to Hawaii?
Well, I came here on vacation once and decided this is where I wanted to live. So I came back here and did some graduate work at the University of Hawaii in order to qualify as a teacher and some other positions. And that's how I got here.
Good for you. A lot of Hawaiian visitors always wish they could, and there you did it.
Yes.
How long have you been watching C-SPAN?
Oh, about 20 years now.
Well, you tell us more about your C-SPAN watching in your essay. So how about if we have you read that, and then we'll come back and talk some more.
All right. Why I watch and participate in viewer call-ins on C-SPAN. I watch and participate in viewer call-ins on C-SPAN because I can't help it. I've been an unabashed C-SPAN junkie for nearly 20 years and am all the richer for it. There is no other TV programming as interesting and informative. It is a national treasure of free speech with class. C-SPAN viewer call-in programs provide a smorgasbord of current and reliable information not otherwise available to me. I live and teach middle school math and social studies on Kauai, where tourists pay dearly to get away from it all. And this is about as far as one can get from serious intellectual discourse. C-SPAN viewer call-ins provide committed lifelong learners with virtual graduate-level seminars in subjects ranging from international affairs, economics, political science, public health, government policies, world religions, literature, science, and technology. These courses present vignettes in 21st century world history and culture as it unfolds and without editing. C-SPAN's guests are unscripted, speaking solely from their personal knowledge, experience, and convictions. They respond to callers' comments and questions directly and often candidly while looking us right in the eye. The callers, who are sometimes experts on the topics being discussed, and often not, provide alternative points of view on important issues. Plus, I can weigh in at any time if I persevere. Most of all, I appreciate each of C-SPAN's wonderful, unflappable hosts who facilitate lively dialogue between callers and guests in a nonpartisan, unbiased, and consistently gracious manner. Please don't ever cut me off.
Well, Christina Carlson, if there's a 5-hour time difference, isn't there, between Washington and Hawaii?
Yes, during daylight savings time, it's 6 hours.
And so it is either 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning when Washington Journal starts. Do you actually watch it live?
Yes, I do.
How
yes,
do you,
I do.
How and why do you do that?
Well, Susan, you have spent time here. You know we roll up our sidewalks around here around when the sun goes down. So since there's nothing good on TV except silly sitcoms and things in the evening, I just go to bed at 7 o'clock. And my day starts at 1, and it's my best time for me to study. I do all kinds of online classes because I do graduate work online just because I love to. Best time in the world for me to enjoy C-SPAN and do my homework.
Well, there's a whole community of night owls out there who are probably identifying with you right now.
Well, I wish we had a focus group on Kauai with C-SPAN viewers. I've never heard anybody else call in from Kauai, and I watch every day just about. So I think I might be the only one here.
This may unearth another one or two. You never know.
Well, that would be great because I'm in the phone book, so they can find me.
Now, what inspires you to pick up the phone and call in? What kind of guest?
Oh, well, I am very interested in education, of course, and especially when you have anyone on that's talking about special education students, the kind of students I work with. And then I also was very interested during the election with some of the things that the candidates had to say during. Well, every time you have an election, I usually have some opinion about that. So, but I'm really mostly content to listen. I find that most of your guests ask the question just about the time I think about it. Somebody will call in and ask, or you or one of the guests, one of the hosts will ask what I'm interested in knowing about. So it's, I don't feel like I have to call in too many times.
Christina Carlson, a night owl, watching C-SPAN on Oceanic Cable in Lihue, Hawaii, where it starts as early as 1 o'clock in the morning. We appreciate all that watching, and thanks for participating in our essay contest.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you so much for considering my essay.
You can read Christina Carlson's winning essay on C-SPAN's website, cspan.org. Look for the 25-year viewer call-in icon.
Coming up on our live 25-hour call-in marathon, a look at congressional scandals with public television's Kwame Holman. At 7 Eastern, Joan Biskupik of USA Today will join us to talk about the U.S. Supreme Court. And then former Clinton Chief of Staff John Podesta on the Bill Clinton years. He'll be followed by Reason magazine editor-in-chief Nick Gillespie on the role of the media covering Washington. The entire 25-hour schedule is on our website, cspan.org. Also, learn how call-in programs evolved on radio and TV, and more about C-SPAN's 25 years of call-in programs. cspan.org. Click on 25 years of viewer call-ins.